The suburban Chicago morning was crisp with that perfect October bite that makes you grateful for your favorite sweater. I pulled into Emma's driveway, the gravel crunching under my Tesla's tires, a sound that always made me think of success, though I'd never say that out loud. The house looked picture-perfect with its manicured lawn and pumpkin decorations scattered across the porch, exactly the kind of home Emma had always dreamed of since we were kids. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one more time, smoothing down my blonde hair that never seemed to cooperate in this humidity. The pale pink dress I'd chosen seemed appropriate for a baby shower, though knowing Emma, she'd probably find something to criticize about it. She always did. The front door was already open, and I could hear the familiar buzz of family conversations, mixed with that particular brand of forced cheerfulness that comes with mandatory family gatherings. Aunt Linda's laugh echoed from somewhere inside, followed by my mother's voice offering someone more coffee. "Nick, there you are." Mom appeared in the doorway, wearing her best hostess smile and the floral dress she reserved for special occasions. "Emma was wondering where you were." I doubted that. Emma was probably hoping I'd gotten lost or decided not to come at all. But I hugged Mom anyway, breathing in her familiar perfume that always smelled like home, even when home didn't feel particularly welcoming. The living room had been transformed into a pink and gold wonderland. Balloons floated near the ceiling, and a beautiful cake shaped like a baby carriage sat on the dining table surrounded by perfectly wrapped gifts. Emma sat in the center of it all like a queen holding court, her hands resting on her 7-month belly, accepting congratulations and cooing over tiny baby clothes. She looked radiant, I had to admit. Pregnancy suited her in that glowing maternal way that made everyone around her smile. Her dark hair was styled in soft waves, and she wore a flowing blue dress that accentuated her bump beautifully. For a moment, I felt a pang of something. Not jealousy exactly, but maybe longing for that kind of unconditional love and celebration. "Nick!" Emma called out when she spotted me, though her smile seemed a little too bright, a little too practiced. "Come meet everyone. I was just telling them about your little computer business." My little computer business. I forced a smile and made my way over, accepting hugs from cousins I hadn't seen in months, and family friends who remembered me as Emma's little sister. The introductions were familiar and exhausting, always defined in relation to someone else, never just as Nick. "So what exactly do you do, dear?" asked Mrs. Henderson, Emma's neighbor who'd apparently become close enough to warrant an invitation. Emma mentioned something about computers. This was my chance. I'd been working up to this moment for weeks, rehearsing how I'd share my news. 3 months ago, my software company had been acquired by a major tech corporation for $12 million. $12 million. It still didn't feel real sometimes. "I actually just sold my company," I said, trying to keep my voice casual despite the butterflies in my stomach. "It was a software platform for small businesses, and we got acquired by Tech Global last month." The room went quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that makes you wonder if you've said something wrong. Then Aunt Linda spoke up. "Sold it? For how much?" she asked with the kind of curiosity that bordered on nosiness. "Well, it was—" I started, but Emma cut me off with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Nick always makes things sound more impressive than they are," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "It was probably just some tiny startup thing, right? Like when she sold jewelry on Etsy in college and called herself an entrepreneur." The room erupted in polite laughter, and I felt my cheeks burn. Mrs. Henderson patted my arm sympathetically, as if Emma had just revealed that I'd been caught in an embarrassing lie. "Emma," Mom said quietly. But Emma was on a roll now. "Don't get me wrong, I'm proud of my little sister," she continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "But you know how she's always been. Big dreams, bigger stories. Remember when she said she was going to be the next Steve Jobs? She was what, 16? More laughter. I stood there, clutching my purse so tightly my knuckles were white, trying to figure out how to respond without causing a scene at my sister's baby shower. The acquisition had been featured in TechCrunch. I had the check stub in my safety deposit box. But somehow, in this room full of people who'd known me since I was in diapers, none of that seemed to matter. "The important thing is that you're trying," Emma said, reaching over to squeeze my hand with mock sincerity. "Not everyone can handle the real responsibility of a family and a mortgage and everything that comes with being an actual adult. Some people get to play with computers forever." I looked around the room at the faces staring back at me, some embarrassed, some amused, some pitying. These were people who were supposed to love me, supposed to celebrate my victories alongside my defeats. Instead, I felt smaller than I had since high school, when Emma's popularity had always overshadowed my academic achievements. "You're right," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "Not everyone gets to do what they love for a living." I excused myself to the bathroom, needing a moment to collect myself before I said something I'd regret. In the mirror, I looked at my reflection and saw not a successful entrepreneur, but Emma's little sister who never quite measured up. The girl who tried too hard, dreamed too big, and apparently couldn't be trusted to tell the truth about her own life. When I returned to the living room, the conversation had moved on to nursery themes and baby names. I spent the rest of the shower smiling and nodding, helping to clean up wrapping paper, and pretending that my heart wasn't breaking just a little bit more with each passing hour. As I drove home that evening, Emma's words echoed in my mind. Not the cruel ones. I was used to those by now. But something else she'd said, almost in passing, about real responsibility and mortgages. There had been something in her voice, a strain that didn't match the perfect picture of her afternoon celebration. I made a mental note to look into it, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the part of me that still remembered when Emma and I shared secrets instead of barbs. Either way, something told me there was more to my sister's story than the golden afternoon I'd just witnessed. The next few days passed in a blur of client meetings and contract negotiations, but I couldn't shake the image of Emma's face from the baby shower. Not the cruel smile when she'd humiliated me, but the brief moment when she'd mentioned mortgages and responsibility. There had been something raw there, something vulnerable that didn't match her perfect suburban queen act. I was sitting in my downtown Chicago office on Wednesday morning, rain pattering against the floor-to-ceiling windows, when curiosity finally got the better of me. My laptop screen reflected my tired face as I opened a new browser window, telling myself this was just innocent research. Sisters keep tabs on each other, right? The house Emma and her husband David had bought 3 years ago was listed in the public records at $450,000. Standard for their neighborhood in Naperville, nothing alarming there. But when I dug deeper into the property records, I found something interesting. They'd refinanced twice in the past 18 months, each time pulling out equity. My phone buzzed with a text from my business partner Jake asking about our afternoon meeting, but I barely glanced at it. I was too busy connecting dots that painted an increasingly worrying picture. David worked as a mid-level manager at an insurance company. His LinkedIn profile hadn't been updated in 2 years, which could mean job security or could mean he'd stopped caring about advancement. Either way, his salary was probably somewhere in the $60,000 range. Respectable, but not exactly luxury living in the Chicago suburbs, especially with a baby coming. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, guilt creeping up my spine. Was I crossing a line? Probably. But something in Emma's voice at the shower had triggered my protective instincts, even after the way she'd treated me. We might not get along, but she was still my sister. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I made a decision that would change everything. I pulled up a credit monitoring service that our company used for background checks on potential employees. It was a gray area ethically, but not technically illegal if I was just looking at publicly available financial information. What I found made my stomach drop. Emma and David weren't just struggling, they were drowning. Credit card debt spread across 6 different companies totaled nearly $40,000. Medical debt from various fertility clinics and specialists added another $35,000. Their mortgage payments were 3 months behind, and I could see collection notices from at least 4 different agencies. I stared at the screen, processing the numbers that told a story completely different from the one Emma had been performing. The fertility treatments explained so much. Why it had taken them 4 years to conceive, why Emma had seemed so desperate for this baby, why she'd been so defensive and cruel lately. Desperation has a way of making people lash out at the ones closest to them. My phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. Jake's name flashed on the screen. "You missed our meeting," he said without preamble when I answered. "What? What time is it?" I glanced at my computer clock and winced. Somehow, I'd been researching Emma's finances for 3 hours. "It's 4:30, Nick. We were supposed to discuss the Henderson account at 2. Are you okay? This isn't like you." Jake had been my business partner since we'd started the company in his garage 5 years ago. He knew me well enough to recognize when something was off, and right now, everything was off. "Family stuff," I said, which was both true and completely inadequate. "Can we reschedule for tomorrow?" "Sure, but Nick, whatever's going on, don't let it consume you. I've seen that look before." After I hung up, I sat in my empty office as the Chicago skyline began to twinkle with evening lights. The weight of what I'd discovered pressed down on my shoulders like a physical thing. Emma wasn't the successful, put-together person she pretended to be. She was scared, overwhelmed, and probably embarrassed by how far behind they'd fallen. That night, I drove to a coffee shop near Emma's house, telling myself I just wanted to think somewhere different. But when I saw David's car in the parking lot of a payday loan place across the street, I knew my subconscious had brought me here for a reason. I watched through my windshield as my brother-in-law emerged from the building. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Even from a distance, I could see the stress in his posture, the way he checked his phone compulsively before getting back in his car. This wasn't a man picking up easy money for a vacation. This was someone desperate enough to pay predatory interest rates just to keep the lights on. The next morning, I called my financial advisor, Marcus Chen, who'd helped me navigate the complexities of the acquisition deal. "I need to understand something about debt purchasing," I said, settling into my home office chair with a cup of coffee that had gone cold while I'd wrestled with my conscience. "Debt purchasing? That's not exactly your usual investment strategy, Nick. Are you thinking about getting into collections?" "Something like that. Hypothetically, if someone wanted to buy up another person's debt, all of it, what would that look like?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Are we talking about a revenge play here? Because debt collection can get ugly fast, and that's not really your style. The opposite, actually. What if someone wanted to buy the debt and then forgive it? That's unusual, but possible. Debt gets sold all the time, often for pennies on the dollar. Credit card companies, medical billing companies, they package up delinquent accounts and sell them to collection agencies. If you had enough cash and the right connections, you could theoretically buy someone's entire debt portfolio. And then you own it. You could collect on it, restructure it, or yes, forgive it entirely. The debtor would never have to know who bought it originally. From their perspective, their debt would just disappear." I felt my heart rate quicken. How long would something like that take? With your resources? Maybe 2 weeks if we move fast. But Nick, this sounds personal. Are you sure this is a good idea? I wasn't sure of anything anymore. But as I looked out my window at the city where Emma and I had grown up, where we'd built our separate lives that somehow kept intersecting in painful ways, I knew I had to try something different. "Let me think about it," I told Marcus, though my mind was already made up. That evening, I sat in my apartment with a bottle of wine and a legal pad, sketching out what this might look like. $80,000 wasn't pocket change, but it wasn't going to bankrupt me either. The acquisition had left me with more money than I'd ever imagined having. And what was the point of financial success if you couldn't use it to help the people you loved, even when those people treated you like garbage at baby showers? I thought about Emma's laugh, sharp and dismissive, designed to cut me down in front of people who mattered to her. But I also thought about the way her hands had trembled slightly when she'd mentioned responsibility and mortgages. The sister I'd grown up with was still in there somewhere, buried under years of competition and resentment, and probably a fair amount of fear. By the time I finished the wine, my decision was made. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. "It's Nick. Let's do it. I want to buy my sister's debt." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "All of it? Every last penny?" The next 2 weeks felt like running a covert operation from my downtown office. Marcus had connected me with a debt purchasing firm called Meridian Financial Services, and their CEO, Patricia Hawkins, had initially been skeptical about my unconventional request. "Let me understand this correctly," she'd said during our first phone call, her New York accent cutting through the static. "You want to purchase specific debts belonging to specific individuals with no intention of collecting on them?" "That's right," I'd confirmed, pacing around my office like a caged animal. "Is that a problem?" "It's unusual. Most of our clients are looking to turn a profit, but your money spends the same as anyone else's. And frankly, the margins on these particular accounts aren't great anyway. The medical debt especially. Those collection rates are terrible." Patricia had been right about one thing. Emma and David's debt wasn't exactly prime real estate in the collections world. 3 months delinquent on multiple accounts with a baby on the way and limited income potential. Most collection agencies would have written them off as a loss within 6 months, but that worked in my favor. Patricia's team was able to purchase the entire portfolio for $28,000, roughly 35 cents on the dollar. It felt almost obscene how cheaply you could buy someone's financial ruin. The hardest part was staying normal around my family while the process unfolded. Sunday dinner at my parents' house became an exercise in acting, sitting across from Emma and David and pretending I didn't know that they'd been eating ramen noodles for dinner most nights to save money. "How are you feeling?" I asked Emma, passing her the mashed potatoes and trying to keep my voice casual. "Tired," she admitted, and for once, her guard was down. "The 3rd trimester is kicking my butt. David's been amazing, though, taking care of everything so I can rest." I glanced at David, who was pushing food around his plate with the distracted air of someone with much bigger problems than Sunday dinner conversation. His wedding ring caught the light, and I noticed it was looser than it used to be. Stress weight loss, probably. "That's what good husbands do," Mom said, reaching over to squeeze David's hand. "You two are going to be wonderful parents." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here we were, playing happy family, while I was secretly orchestrating the biggest financial relief of their lives. But I couldn't tell anyone. Not even Mom and Dad. This had to be anonymous, or it wouldn't work. On Thursday morning, Patricia called with an update that made my hands shake with excitement. "We've got everything," she said. 6 credit card companies, 3 medical billing services, and 1 mortgage servicer. Your sister and her husband officially owe Meridian Financial Services $81,467 as of this morning. And now? Now you own it all. What do you want me to do? I took a deep breath, looking out at the Chicago River flowing past my office building. Somewhere across the city, Emma was probably sitting in her kitchen, staring at collection notices and wondering how they were going to manage when the baby came. Send them forgiveness letters for everything. Make it look official, like you've decided the accounts are uncollectible and you're writing them off. But make sure they understand the debt is completely forgiven, not just settled. You got it. They should receive the letters by early next week. After I hung up, I sat in my chair feeling lighter than I had in months. It was done. In a few days, Emma and David would open their mailbox to find letters that would change their entire world, and they'd never know it came from the sister who'd been publicly humiliated at a baby shower. That weekend, I found myself driving past their house more often than was probably healthy. On Saturday morning, I saw David outside mowing the lawn, something he'd probably been putting off because he couldn't afford to fix the mower. But there he was, wrestling with the ancient machine, sweat staining his shirt despite the October chill. I wanted to roll down my window and tell him that help was coming, that he could stop worrying about the calls from collection agencies and the certified letters from the mortgage company. But the power of what I was doing lay in its invisibility. This wasn't about gratitude or recognition. This was about doing something good because it needed to be done. Sunday evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. My heart nearly stopped when I saw her name on my screen. "Hey, can we talk? I've been thinking about some things." I stared at the message for a full minute before responding. "Sure. What's up?" "Not over text. Can you come over tomorrow evening? David's working late and I could use the company." This was unprecedented. Emma never invited me over just to talk. We saw each other at family gatherings and exchanged pleasantries at holidays, but we hadn't had a real conversation in years, certainly not since the baby shower disaster. "I'll be there around 7, I texted back. Monday dragged by with the weight of anticipation. I kept checking my phone, half expecting Emma to cancel or come up with some excuse. But by 6:30, I was sitting in her driveway, watching the lights flicker on in her kitchen windows. Emma answered the door in maternity pajamas and fuzzy slippers, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked exhausted, but somehow more real than I'd seen her in years. "Thanks for coming," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I made tea." "Well, I made tea for me and coffee for you because I know you think tea is basically water with false advertising." I laughed despite my nerves. "You remember that?" "I remember a lot of things," she said, leading me to the kitchen where 2 mugs sat steaming on the counter. That's kind of what I wanted to talk about. We settled at her kitchen table, the same one where we'd done homework together as kids when I'd visit her first apartment. The familiarity of it made my chest tight with something between nostalgia and regret. "I owe you an apology," Emma said without preamble, her hands wrapped around her mug like it was anchoring her. "What I did at the baby shower was terrible. I've been thinking about it every day since then, and I can't figure out how to make it right." I opened my mouth to say it was fine, to brush it off like I always did, but she held up a hand to stop me. "Let me finish. I was cruel and I was wrong, and I think I know why I did it." She took a shaky breath. "I'm jealous of you, Nick. I have been for years, and it's eating me alive." "Jealous of me?" The words came out more incredulous than I'd intended. "Emma, you have everything. The house, the husband, the baby on the way. And you have freedom," she interrupted. "You have success that you earned all by yourself. You have money and independence and this amazing career, and when you told everyone about selling your company, I couldn't stand that you were winning again." Again. The word hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we could cross. "I didn't know we were competing," I said quietly. "We've always been competing. At least I have. And I'm tired of it." Emma's eyes filled with tears, and she wiped them away impatiently. "I want to be proud of my little sister instead of threatened by her. I want to celebrate your wins instead of trying to tear them down." I reached across the table and took her hand, feeling the slight tremor that had become constant in the past few months. Tomorrow, or maybe the day after, she'd get the letters that would change everything. But right now, this moment was about something bigger than money or debt or financial relief. "I want that too," I told her, and meant it more than I'd meant anything in years. We talked until nearly midnight, about childhood memories and adult disappointments, about dreams deferred and hopes for the future. And when I finally drove home through the quiet suburban streets, I knew that buying Emma's debt had been about more than just helping with bills. It had been about buying us both a chance to start over. I was in a client meeting Wednesday afternoon when my phone started buzzing incessantly. 3 missed calls from Emma, followed by a stream of texts that made my heart race even through the professional facade I was maintaining. Nick, something incredible happened. Can you call me? I need to tell someone, and you're the only person who might understand. I think I'm having a panic attack, but in a good way. I excused myself from the conference room, leaving Jake to handle the presentation while I stepped into the hallway with shaking hands. Emma answered on the first ring. Nick, oh my God, Nick. I don't know what's happening, but something amazing just... Slow down, I said, though my own pulse was thundering in my ears. What's going on? The debt, she whispered, like saying it too loud might make it disappear. All of it. The credit cards, the medical bills, even the mortgage arrears. Letters came today saying everything's been forgiven. Everything, Nick. $81,000 just gone. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes as relief and terror warred in my chest. It had worked. The letters had arrived, and Emma was free. But hearing the raw disbelief in her voice made me realize how much this meant to her, and how impossible it would be to keep my secret. That's incredible, I managed. How is that even possible? I don't know. Emma's voice cracked with emotion. The letters all came from some company called Meridian Financial Services. They said they'd reviewed our accounts and determined them to be uncollectible, and were writing them off completely. But Nick, this doesn't happen. Companies don't just forgive $80,000 out of the goodness of their hearts. My mouth went dry. What do you think it means? I think someone helped us, she said quietly. Someone who cares about us but didn't want us to know. David thinks I'm being paranoid, but I can feel it in my bones. Someone did this for us. I pressed my forehead against the cool wall, my mind racing. Emma was too smart, knew me too well. Of course she would figure it out eventually. Who would do something like that? I asked, hating how the lie tasted on my tongue. That's what I keep trying to figure out. David's parents don't have that kind of money. Mine certainly don't. But there aren't many people in our lives who could just casually drop 80 grand to help us out. The silence stretched between us, heavy with implication. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel her putting the pieces together. Nick, she said finally, her voice so soft I had to strain to hear it. Your company sale, how much was it really worth? My knees nearly gave out. Emma, please don't lie to me. Not after what we talked about the other night. How much? I looked around the empty hallway of my office building, at the abstract art on the walls that suddenly seemed to mock the gravity of this moment. There was no going back from here. 12 million, I whispered. Emma was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with tears. You bought our debt. It wasn't a question, so I didn't answer. I just listened to my sister cry on the other end of the phone, 3 miles and a lifetime of complicated history stretching between us. Why? She finally asked. After what I did to you at the shower, after all the years of me being awful to you, why would you do this? I thought about lying, about deflecting, about making some joke to lighten the moment. But Emma deserved better than that. Because you're my sister, I said simply. Because I love you even when you hate me. Because you were drowning, and I could throw you a life preserver, and it seemed like the most obvious thing in the world. I don't hate you, Emma sobbed. I never hated you. I was just so scared and angry and embarrassed, and taking it out on you was easier than admitting how badly we'd screwed up. You didn't screw up, I said firmly. You tried to have a baby. Medical bills aren't a moral failing, Emma. They're just life being unfair. How long have you known? About the debt? I closed my eyes, remembering that afternoon in my office when curiosity had led me down a rabbit hole of public records and credit reports. Since the day after the shower, I could tell something was wrong, so I looked into it. And you decided to fix it. Just like that. Just like that. Emma laughed through her tears, a sound that was equal parts joy and disbelief. Do you have any idea what this means for us? David hasn't slept through the night in months. I've been lying awake calculating how we were going to afford formula and diapers and daycare when we could barely keep the electricity on. And now you can focus on being parents instead of drowning in bills. I can't accept this, she said suddenly. Nick, this is too much. $80,000. It's done, I interrupted. The debt is forgiven, the letters are official, and there's no takesies-backsies in the world of corporate finance. But I have to pay you back somehow. You don't owe me anything. That's the whole point. That evening, Emma showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing in the hallway with red-rimmed eyes and a determination that reminded me of the sister I'd grown up with, the one who used to defend me from playground bullies even when she was mad at me for stealing her favorite sweater. We need to talk, she said, pushing past me into my living room, face to face. I gestured to the couch, but she remained standing, her hands resting on her belly as if drawing strength from the baby inside. I spent the afternoon thinking about what you did, she began, her voice steadier than it had been on the phone, and I realized something. You didn't just pay off our debt. You gave me back my dignity. Emma, let me finish. For months, I've been this person I didn't recognize. Desperate, cruel, taking my fear out on everyone around me, but especially you, because you represented everything I thought I'd failed at. Success, independence, the ability to solve your own problems. She sat down heavily, the weight of pregnancy and emotion making her movements careful. But you didn't just solve our problems from a distance. You did it quietly, anonymously, without any expectation of gratitude or recognition. You did it because it needed doing, and you could do it. It wasn't entirely selfless, I admitted. I wanted my sister back, the one who used to braid my hair and help me with math homework, and tell me I could be anything I wanted when I grew up. Emma's eyes filled with tears again. She's still here. She just got lost under a mountain of debt and disappointment and fear. But Nick, what you did, it's not just about the money. It's about believing I was worth saving even when I didn't believe it myself. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the Chicago skyline light up through my windows. Finally, Emma spoke again. I want to name the baby Nicole, she said. After you. Is that okay? I felt my throat close up with emotion. You don't have to do that. I want to. And when she's old enough to understand, I want to tell her about her Aunt Nick, who taught her mom that love isn't about keeping score. It's about showing up for the people you care about, especially when they don't deserve it. As I looked at my sister, really looked at her, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Hope. The debt forgiveness had lifted more than just a financial burden. It had lifted the weight of shame and fear that had been crushing her spirit. And in that moment, I knew that every penny of those $81,000 had been worth it, not for the bills it had paid, but for the sister it had given back to me. 3 months later, I was standing in the maternity ward of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, holding my niece Nicole Emma Peterson for the first time. She was perfect. Tiny fingers wrapped around my thumb, dark hair that stuck up in impossible directions, and Emma's stubborn chin already evident even in sleep. She looks like you did as a baby, Emma said from the hospital bed, exhausted but glowing with the particular radiance that comes after successfully bringing a human being into the world. Mom always said you were the prettiest baby she'd ever seen, which used to make me so jealous. You were jealous of a baby? I asked, gently swaying as little Nicole made soft sleeping sounds. I was jealous of a baby, a toddler, a kid, a teenager, and an adult. Emma laughed. I've basically been jealous of you our entire lives, but I'm working on it. The past 3 months had been a revelation in what our relationship could be when it wasn't overshadowed by financial stress and sibling rivalry. Emma had started therapy, something she could finally afford now that she wasn't choosing between mental health care and grocery money. David had taken a promotion at work that he'd been too distracted to pursue before. And slowly, carefully, Emma and I had been rebuilding something that had been broken for far too long. How are you feeling about going back to work? I asked, settling into the chair beside her bed while still holding Nicole. Terrified, she admitted, but also excited. It's amazing how much clearer everything becomes when you're not constantly worried about money. I can actually think about being a mom instead of just surviving until tomorrow. David appeared in the doorway with coffee and the particular shell-shocked expression of new fathers everywhere. How are my girls doing? Your girls are perfect, Emma said, reaching for his hand. Although your daughter seems to prefer her Aunt Nick at the moment, David kissed Emma's forehead before settling into the other chair. Over the past few months, he'd transformed from the stressed, weight-losing man I'd seen at the payday loan place into someone who could smile without effort again. The change in him was almost as dramatic as the change in Emma. Nick, he said, his voice serious despite the joy of the moment. I know we've talked about this before, but I need to say it again. What you did for us changed our lives, Emma finished. Literally saved our marriage, probably. Definitely saved my sanity. I looked down at Nicole, who was starting to wake up with the particular indignation of babies who find themselves in unfamiliar arms. You two would have figured it out. You're stronger than you think. Maybe, David said, but we'll never know, will we? Because you made sure we didn't have to find out. The truth was, I'd learned as much from the experience as they had. Buying Emma's debt had taught me something about the real power of financial success. Not the fancy cars or expensive dinners, but the ability to change someone's entire trajectory with a single decision. It had also taught me something about love that I'd never understood before. Sometimes the most profound way to show you care about someone is to help them without needing them to know about it. There's something I want to discuss with both of you, I said, carefully transferring Nicole back to Emma's arms. I've been thinking about starting a foundation. Emma raised an eyebrow. What kind of foundation? Medical debt relief. There are thousands of families just like yours. Good people who got sick or had complications or just got unlucky with insurance coverage. People who are drowning in debt through no fault of their own. David leaned forward in his chair. You want to do for other families what you did for us? On a larger scale, yeah. I've been working with Marcus and Patricia to understand how the debt purchasing market works. We could buy up medical debt for pennies on the dollar and forgive it systematically. Help families who are in the same situation you were in. Emma was quiet for a long moment, looking down at Nicole with an expression I couldn't quite read. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright with something that looked like pride. You want to turn what happened to us into something bigger. I want to turn what I learned from you into something that matters. You taught me that financial stress doesn't just affect bank accounts. It affects everything. Relationships, mental health, the ability to be present for the people you love. If I can take some of that pressure off other families, count us in, Emma said without hesitation. I don't know what we can contribute financially, but I want to help however I can. Maybe I could work with the families, help them navigate the process, provide support. Emma, you just had a baby. And now I have perspective that other people in this situation need. I know what it feels like to lie awake at night wondering if you're going to lose your house. I know what it's like to be too proud to ask for help and too desperate not to need it. Over the next hour, as we passed Nicole between us and talked about the foundation, I felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood. The absolute certainty that Emma and I were on the same team. We were planning something together, building something that mattered, using our combined experiences to create something neither of us could have accomplished alone. What would you call it? David asked as visiting hours began to wind down. I looked at Emma, who was nursing Nicole with the peaceful concentration of new mothers everywhere. I was thinking the Nicole Foundation, after this little one, and after what she taught us about second chances. Emma's eyes filled with tears, the good kind this time, the kind that come from gratitude instead of desperation. She's going to grow up knowing that her name represents something important. She's going to grow up knowing that her family believes in helping people, I corrected. That when you have the power to change someone's life for the better, you do it. As I drove home that evening through the familiar streets of Chicago, I thought about the baby shower that had started this whole journey. Emma's cruel laughter, my humiliation, the moment when I'd decided that love was more important than pride. None of it had turned out the way I'd expected. I'd thought buying Emma's debt would be a one-time gesture, a way to help my sister and maybe repair our relationship. Instead, it had become the foundation for something much larger, both the charity we were planning and the new understanding Emma and I had built together. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Thank you for seeing who I could be instead of just who I was. I pulled over to respond properly. Thank you for teaching me that the best investments aren't in companies or real estate. They're in the people we love. 6 months later, the Nicole Foundation forgave its first $1 million in medical debt, helping 847 families across Illinois start over without the crushing weight of healthcare costs. Emma returned to work part-time, serving as our family liaison coordinator, while David volunteered with our financial literacy programs on weekends. And Nicole? She's growing up in a house filled with love instead of stress, with parents who can focus on raising her instead of just surviving until tomorrow. She's growing up with an Aunt Nick who learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do with success is share it quietly, and a mom who learned that asking for help, even accepting it, isn't a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. Every time I hold her, I remember that afternoon in my office when I'd discovered Emma's debt and made a decision that changed all of our lives. I'd thought I was buying my sister's financial freedom, but what I'd really purchased was the chance for all of us to become the people we were meant to be, and that, it turns out, was worth every penny.